From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It was another busy week in the Alabama legislature as the House and Senate met for the 24th and 25th legislative days. That leaves us with 5 days remaining in this session. The tentative plan is to spread those 5 meeting days out over the next 2 weeks and end the session before Mother's Day. But there is a small chance that the session could stretch into that 3rd week of May. We'll know for sure soon enough. In the Senate this week, movement on the Education Trust Fund. That's the budget that funds the range of education services from pre-K to higher ed. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders is tracking this progress.
Following the passage of a historic $9.3 billion education trust fund budget by the House, the spotlight shifted to the Senate Finance and Taxation Education Committee to break down the numbers.
When you're the second chamber, the concrete begins to set after that first chamber has passed the budget, and things get a little bit more tricky as you go to try to find money to meet the priorities of your members.
During a public hearing on the budget, a clear priority emerged: the allocation of funds for a summer meal program aimed at supporting low-income children.
Food insecurity rises during the summer, and Alabama children and teens who participate in school lunch and breakfast programs will lose access to these nutritious meals.
We're really here to see that hungry people are fed. And we're asking you, as you look at the 2025 budget, to include the administrative portion of the cost that will allow the federal government to pay for summer meals in 2025 in the $80 to $100 million range.
The state had previously chosen not to participate in the federal program for 2024. However, rejoining for 2025 would likely require spending more than $10 million for administrative cost.
Finding $10 million, what booby traps are there out there, or landmines that might get triggered as we move resources from one place to the other.
But for Democrats on the committee, finding the funding somewhere appears to be a top priority.
And it's not so much as a big deal to anybody else, but I'm just speaking publicly to say this. I'm supporting y'all 110%. And we're going to feed these children.
A vote on that budget is expected here in committee next Tuesday, with a possible final vote on the Senate floor by the end of next week. For Capitol Journal, I'm Jeff Sanders.
Also in the Senate this week, things got a little tense when a veterans health care bill came to the floor. Senate Bill 135 from Senator Andrew Jones would establish an integrated health network for veterans, specifically targeted towards mental health, substance abuse, and suicide prevention. But 2 senators who are veterans themselves objected to the bill, saying it would duplicate services and possibly run up unsustainable costs. The bill was carried over, which angered Jones because he never got a chance to explain it.
You can't create or help people get through the layers of government when you add another layer. This is what we're doing here.
Motion to carry over.
To talk to the physical officer.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say aye.
No.
Or no?
No.
Sorry. All right.
I'd like to keep discussing the
The ayes have it. That bill is carried over.
And frankly, I'm a little appalled at the tactics of my colleague to come in here and just carry something over that we haven't even.
All right. Senator Jones,
When did you
we
come?
don't need to just
Yeah,
keep it on. All right.
I'd like to know.
Hold on. We can't have discussion, though, on point of personal privilege.
Okay. Well,
All right. Let's go to the next bill.
can I finish my point?
Sure. Yeah. Just we can't be attacking other senators on the floor, right?
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
I just ask that if anyone has concerns, please come to me and talk about them, because this was a bill that was worked out and agreed to by the Department of Veterans Affairs, by the Department of Mental Health, by all the providers, and the House sponsor and I.
The Senate also gave final passage to legislation aimed at preventing squatting in Alabama. This is a national trend of individuals taking up residence at someone else's property and manipulating tenant laws to remain. House Bill 182 from Representative Craig Lipscomb gives property owners more legal tools for having unwanted squatters removed and increases the penalties for squatting. Someone who enters a property illegally and causes $1,000 or more in damage could be charged with a Class C felony, which is punishable by 1 to 10 years in prison.
Thankfully, it's not a significant issue in Alabama yet. It is an issue to some extent, but we're trying to be proactive rather than reactive about the whole matter. After watching what's happening across the nation, especially in Georgia, there are some real hot spots where people are literally being instructed on how to take over people's real estate and to not only inhabit it, but to, in some cases, potentially own it. And so we want to prevent that before it becomes a problem here.
That bill is on its way to the governor's desk. In the House, multiple controversial issues came to the floor this week. With the days winding down, some lawmakers felt like it was their last chance to get legislation moving in the process. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has that story.
Lawmakers are debating bills throughout the lower chamber, but many are still watching for action on the gambling package. A member of that conference committee gives an update.
The committee is working together very well. We have discussed the differences between the two versions, the House bill and the Senate bill, and some of them were pretty vast differences. I think that I'm confident that some of those we can overcome. I think that we are working toward overcoming those, and I'm very positive about our ability to produce a product.
Other proposals cover issues ranging from education to crime. House Bill 414 sets tougher rules regarding securing firearms.
The bill simply says that if a young person takes a gun onto a school campus and authorities find out that that gun was secured or is owned by a parent, a guardian, or a loved one, that individual will be held responsible if that gun was not properly secured.
On the House floor, debate over House Bill 385 addresses guidelines for exposing youth to questionable material.
Any sexual or gender-oriented conduct that knowingly exposes minors to persons who are dressed in a sexually revealing, exaggerated, or provocative clothing or costumes, or are stripping or engaged in lewd or lascivious dancing, presentations, or activities in K-12 public schools or public libraries where minors are expected and known to be present without parental presence or consent.
You know, I agree, we don't want our youth and our children exposed to different acts. But I think this one is kind of stepping on some First Amendment rights.
House Bill 385 passes. From the State House, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
The House also debated the issue of sexual content in public school curriculum. Last year, the state enacted a law prohibiting content that was not age appropriate from being taught in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. This includes instructions or discussions related to gender identity or sexual orientation. House Bill 130 from Representative Mac Butler seeks to extend that prohibition into the higher grades. It originally sought to extend it all the way through 12th grade, but it was amended to now stop at the 8th grade. The bill would also prohibit public school employees from displaying a flag or other insignia representing a gender ideology.
Well, it extends the existing prohibitions of teaching on sexual orientation or sexual identity or gender identity from the 5th grade to the 12th grade, but Representative Drummond has an amendment to take it to the 8th grade, which we consider a friendly amendment. So that's what we're really talking about, is K through 8.
Because I don't want anybody texting me, tweeting me, emailing me, or IGing me to say that I voted for nothing crazy like this. Because my belief is you can pass whatever bill you want to in this house. I've said this before. But until we regulate these in the hands of children who are school age, you can run around and pass every bill against any educator you want to. The most deadly of weapons that a child has,
I would agree with you on that.
Is their cell phone.
After a lengthy debate, that bill passed and now goes to the Senate. Also in the House this week, lawmakers took up legislation on the issue of unionization. Senate Bill 231 from Senator Arthur Orr would prohibit any economic incentive dollars from going to companies that voluntarily recognize a union without a vote among workers. They could also lose those incentives if they fail to provide for a secret ballot in union elections. Majority Leader Scott Stadhagen carried the bill in the House and argued it would not impact current companies who already have a union, but it would serve as a deterrent to those whose workers are considering unionization right now, namely Mercedes and Hyundai.
SB 231 gives the employees the opportunity to vote on a private ballot. It does not affect industries right now that are currently voting the way they are. It's just for future after bill is signed.
So I'm just wondering, what's going on right now that's forcing us to get to this point? We already have a right to work. We already have, you said the option for secret ballots.
Yeah, the employer can decide if it wanted to be card checked or private. This would just basically say that the employee will have a private vote. And I mean, I think that's important for the employee. I think they would, I think they'd like that.
Okay. Do you support the unions?
That's irrelevant to this bill.
No, it's a union bill. I'm asking, like,
it depends on the union.
What's your thoughts on unionization?
Okay, my thoughts on unions, it depends on the union itself. We've had some unions that have been a part of our state for a very long time, and they have worked very well.
Okay.
The bill passed but was amended, so it now goes back to the Senate. I'll talk in detail about this unionization issue with Secretary of Commerce Ellen McNair later in the show. The House will likely take up the general fund budget next week. They'll also likely consider legislation from Budget Committee Chairman Rex Reynolds allocating some of the state's opioid settlement funds. I spoke with Chairman Reynolds yesterday about where this money is being directed.
Department of Corrections, we've been doing what we call MAT, medically assisted treatment, to some of the inmates within 6 months of their release. And then we follow that process into the probation and paroles when they're on parole like that, and track them with treatment if needed. And then, of course, 20% of this funding, a little over $20 million, will go to mental health. And that will be a grant process, just like we did the $8.5 million of the 10 last year. And we had a lot of organizations get funding from that. The average grant was around $300,000 to $400,000 out of that program, and that will work similar this time. Outside of that, we also included in that $20 million, we included about $3 million for our 988 suicide line, all which is connected to the abuse of opioids and addictions, unfortunately. And we've got $3 million in there for our veterans for a specific pilot program, I call it the ecosystem of care, and we'll want to put that out there as an RFP and see who in Alabama can offer that care for our veterans. And then finally we had Auburn University. They've already got a pharmacy school that's doing opioid research, opioid training for not only their pharmacists but other physicians, and they're beginning K through 12 programs and beyond for education on the prevention side. And so we allocated them $1 million to expand those programs throughout Alabama. And then to UAB, Birmingham area, they've got a small program in Tuscaloosa and then into Montgomery, and we're adding additional residencies for psychiatry. Those that will assist in some of those that are suffering from addictions, and also the violent crime that's associated with that.
An interesting meeting this week on health care and potential Medicaid expansion. House and Senate Health Committee members invited leaders from Arkansas and North Carolina to talk about their state's experience expanding Medicaid. Those states are interesting because North Carolina is the latest state to pull the trigger on expansion, and Arkansas years ago implemented a public-private partnership similar to what Alabama leaders have been discussing.
I thought it was incredibly smart that they asked Arkansas and North Carolina to come in and just talk about the ways that they had chosen to do their Medicaid expansions, just to learn more about it. So it was really just giving them information. When a state decides it wants to go down the path of changing its Medicaid coverage, expanding it, or changing it, adding services, that state has to design it in a way that works for the actual state. You can't just come in and copy Arkansas exactly or copy North Carolina exactly. Every state's different, and every Medicaid program is different.
I'll talk in more detail on this issue with Danne Howard of the Alabama Hospital Association later in the show. Renewed calls this week for helping more Alabama parents afford child care and thus removing a barrier from them entering the workforce. Legislative leaders were joined by advocates for women and children at a press conference as they urged the Senate to take action on legislation offering tax incentives for expanding access to affordable child care.
It's amazing to me, according to the research, 50% of the mothers consider leaving the workforce because of child care. That's amazing. You know, over 85,000 families in our state need some type of child care. So it only makes sense that these women are wanting to get back in the workforce, but when you're paying $12,000 a year or somewhere in the neighborhood of that for child care, and you got a couple of kids, it makes it hard. I mean, if you're talking about 2 kids and it's $24,000 and you got to pay for utilities and gas and overhead for your family, for a single mom, it's almost impossible.
We realize that in an effort to increase the workforce participation rate, that we have to be able to provide a way for a pathway for families to be able to re-enter the workforce. And this is the perfect piece of legislation that's going to really get us, make us stronger than we've ever been before. I know that workforce participation has been an issue for the state and across the nation. But I do think that this piece of legislation is going to help those families get back into the workforce. It's going to help businesses be able to either build out a facility on site or partner with a provider in order to expand access to child care. And then the credits will also help those working families be able to get some money toward paying for child care. And so the accessibility, the affordability is important, and then the quality.
And those are the highlights from this week in the legislature. The House and Senate will return on Tuesday to begin the final stretch of this session. We'll be right back with this week's guest interview portion of the show. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capitol Journal.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Ellen McNair, Secretary of Commerce for the state of Alabama. Ms. Secretary, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure.
Well, I wanted to start by kind of getting you to introduce yourself a little bit. You're the new Secretary of Commerce. Greg Canfield was the previous person in that role. He was there for a long time.
Right, 12 years.
So talk about your background in coming into this and sort of the role of the Commerce Secretary in the state.
Sure. So huge shoes to fill with Greg Canfield's departure. For 12 years, he led this effort, and the success that he enjoyed and the team enjoyed, it is going to be very hard to duplicate. But my experience, and I hate to use this number, but 40 years in economic development, primarily at the local level with the Montgomery Chamber. But I also have worked at the Department of Commerce twice in my career, once as a project manager and then once leading the research department there.
Interesting.
So I have had that statewide experience in the past. But I think having the background of a local economic developer is extremely helpful in this position because you really do understand the challenges and the opportunities at the local level. And quite frankly, that's where so much of the work is done. The site preparation, the community involvement, and all the partners that are necessary to come together, that's brought together at the local level. And I'm really looking forward from this chair to be able to support those local economic development organizations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw the other day that y'all and the governor announced the development of a new strategy.
Right.
It wasn't in the announcement of a strategy. You're saying basically we're going to take months to develop one. Talk about that. What goes into that and what is the goal?
Sure. So the one thing that Governor Ivey asked me to do as I joined this team is to develop a new strategic plan for economic development for the state. So the last plan was done in 2012.
Is that the Accelerate Alabama?
Accelerate Alabama, and then it was adjusted and modified a little bit in 2016. So the world has changed a good bit in those years. So it really is time to do another approach. So that's a big job in trying to really understand the complexities of where we are and really predicting the future. It's a big challenge. It's a big job to do. So I brought together a core group of people. Bill Poole, who of course is finance director for the state, but really his role, I asked him to join because of his role with Innovate Alabama. And he was chairman, is chairman of that effort now, and went through this process for the last 3 years of a strategic plan in implementation, and his expertise and experience in that process is so helpful. Greg Barker, president of EDPA, and of course EDPA is an incredible partner to the Department of Commerce, and the private sector input that EDPA brings to bear. And Greg personally just is one of the finest economic developers in the state. And then the third person I asked is Dr. David Bronner. You cannot really oversell the impact that he and his organization have had in economic development in the state of Alabama and the resources that they bring to the table.
He's kind of synonymous with economic development.
Absolutely. So I really wanted to bring in some great thinkers, some great economic development thinkers, but also people that get things done. And all three of those organizations and those individuals not only are visionaries, but they make things happen.
What's the timeline? When should we expect something, a new strategic plan for economic development?
So what the governor announced last week is the hiring of the consultants, and that is the first step. So that core team that we discussed, really developed a strategy and a time frame. I had a deadline that I told Governor Ivey that I would give her our process by the end of March, which is what I did. We have hired McKinsey & Company, world-class consultant, to do the quantitative piece, really looking at what those targets should be, and really looking at both the opportunities and the challenges that we may face in those targets. Because some of our targets, for instance, over 1.5 million internal combustion engines are produced in the state of Alabama this in 1 year. So that may face a challenge in the future. So we're really looking at McKinsey to come in and really help us predict the future and where our opportunities will come in. And then we needed a process to gather everyone's voice in this. So there are so many entities, so many individuals and organizations across our state that really need input into this strategic plan. So we have contracted with Troy University and Alabama A&M to help direct that process, because we needed a very thoughtful, strategic process to get all of that input in to the McKinsey team to be able to build and have a voice in this strategic plan.
Yeah, research based.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we will be reaching out across the state throughout the spring and the summer to get all of that input from all these different partners that we need their input in, and then incorporate that with the work that McKenzie is doing. The third part of this that we will go to request for proposal probably mid to late summer is going to be the implementation plan. So once the plan starts developing a little bit more, we will then look at how commerce needs to be structured. And are we structured properly to be able to implement this strategic plan? So really take a look at how we're set up, and then how we relate to BCA and EDPA and the Economic Development Association of Alabama, Manufacture Alabama, how we work together with those groups, because right now it is such a blessing to have the leaders of those groups. They are so like-minded and so willing to be partners, but we want to set this up for continued and sustainable partnerships long after those of us sitting in these chairs right now are gone.
Mm-hmm. A soup to nuts reevaluation.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
It is going to be exciting.
We'll look forward to that.
Yeah, and McKenzie really, they have done so much work in this area. They have worked with over 25 states. And I met just last week with the Secretary of Commerce from the state of Arkansas, and they have hired McKenzie to do a very similar function. So we know McKenzie has the skill sets to do this, and they've been active with the Kentucky program and Virginia. They really had, their proposal was extremely strong with a lot of great experience. So.
Yeah, we'll be following that.
Yeah.
You mentioned internal combustion engines.
Yes.
That makes me think of the auto industry in Alabama, and it's really in the news right now, really facing maybe a turning point, because you've got really serious unionization efforts there at Mercedes, really the first automaker in Alabama, and now also at Hyundai. Getting pretty, we got a vote coming up in May at Mercedes. Hyundai may be around the corner. You just saw what happened at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, just right across the border. The state has been resistant to this. The governor's been resistant to this unionization effort, legislative leaders. Why is that? What are the consequences from your perspective of if unionization efforts start happening at automakers in Alabama?
Well, nationwide, the UAW numbers have been steadily going down, so they needed, a new supply of members to join their ranks. They admitted very publicly that they're going to spend over $40 million to unionize the international manufacturers that are primarily in the South, and they targeted specifically, as you said, Volkswagen, Mercedes, and Hyundai initially. So this is, extremely concerning to us that outside the state, outside the South, organizers are coming into our state really trying to disrupt an industry that has powered our state for so many decades. And over 50,000 people enjoy their careers in the automotive industry in the state of Alabama. So it is a real driver. It is just an incredible sector for our state, and the growth that we've had, just my experience, of course, with Hyundai here locally in Montgomery. Hyundai's invested over $5 billion in the city of Montgomery, just in the expansions in the last 20 years. They've had 18 expansions in the last 20 years of operation. They employ well over 4,000 folks. So the impact to the community and the state is tremendous from the auto industry. So we've had great success, and having this outside force is really concerning. Mercedes and Hyundai have never had layoffs. And since the Big Three's contracts were signed last fall, over 18,000 temporary and permanent layoffs have been had by those big three.
So is that the thrust of the argument that, okay, if unionization happens, fewer jobs will be available now and in the future? I'm just trying to get to like what's the difference?
Yeah. So obviously, not only could there be layoffs, there could be investment made in other plants in other parts of the country or in other countries. So already Ford, General Motors, Stellantis have said that they are going to be going outside this, United States.
Is that because the labor is more expensive because of the union?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And the ability to innovate and the ability to be able to quickly, change gears if they need to. Our automakers have enjoyed incredible flexibility in being able to, meet the demands of the customers. And so by having a union, it will slow that down. And those team members who have enjoyed direct communication with the company will no longer have that direct communication. And their union dollars will be leaving our state. So those are payroll dollars that we would enjoy circulating in the state of Alabama that will be leaving the state to go to other union efforts, a lot of which the efforts that the union support are not necessarily efforts that citizens of the state of Alabama support. And that's really a critical point.
Yeah, and I understand your point, and I think I understand sort of the threat and the risks and the possible consequences of that. Other side of that coin, some of these workers at Hyundai, at Mercedes, have seems to be some legitimate complaints about work conditions, temporary workers and hours, just things like that, maybe pay. So, I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, isn't this coming from a place where they have legit complaints that they think that a union might help them have better conditions, better pay, things like that?
So that's one of the things. I mean, Governor Ivey has been on the phone with both the leaders of Mercedes and Hyundai, and have said, if there are issues, you need to fix this. I mean, she's been very bold in her, in her voice, using her voice to encourage Mercedes and Hyundai to do what they need to do to be sure that this isn't necessary. So absolutely, those automakers have a responsibility, but it's pretty impressive. And again, I've got much more familiarity with Hyundai because of my years of experience there. But the tremendous, benefits and wages are well above the areas and quite frankly the state's average wage, way above. And they have incredible benefits, and it is career building opportunities there. And over 2,500 people have their application into Hyundai right now.
So people are coming.
So people are wanting jobs there.
That says something.
And could it be better? Could they do things? Yes. And this is a wake-up call for them to be responsive to the employees' needs and listen to them. I think absolutely that needs to be done. Yeah. But hopefully we can do that on a one-to-one basis without a third party interfering.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting. I guess it was 2 years ago, Amazon fought off that unionization effort at their Bessemer facility. But Amazon was really proactive. I mean, they were ahead of the game, really communicating with those workers. And so I kind of wonder how this is going to play out for these two things. Yeah. We're going to be following it very closely.
Yeah, and I think both Mercedes and Hyundai and other, believe me, it's gotten the attention of all manufacturers across all states and really any business. I mean, it really is a wake-up call to be able to, to listen to your employees. And nowadays with the unemployment rate so low, I mean, companies are doing that because to keep good skilled workers, you've got to be a place of business that people want to come and work at.
Sure. We only have a little bit of time, but you touched on something, workforce, right? Low unemployment, also low labor participation rate, right? We've got several bills in the State House right now trying to remove barriers to the workforce, try to get more people off the sidelines into jobs, things like that. But I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because your job is to recruit companies, right? To have these high-level negotiations, recruitments. So how does this come up when you're doing that? You're Commerce is recruiting a company, big, project. I know some are in the works right now. How does workforce come up? I'm sure it's a part of the conversation. How are we going to, have folks to man the plant to actually do these things? What are the questions they ask, and what are they looking for in terms of workforce?
Well, first of all, the kind of jobs that we are targeting now are those jobs that are higher wages, and we have the ability now to be able to be more selective of the types of companies that we want to bring into this state, into the communities in the state. So we're really looking at those companies that really can add value to our state. High paid, high wages, great companies to work for. But obviously, the ability to attract and retain skilled labor is a problem all over the country. And it really is going to be addressed in our strategic plan in a way that we've never addressed it before, which is quality of place. And that communities, a company comes to a community. While the state is important, and the fact that the state of Alabama is a welcome state to business, that is critical. But they'll come and they locate in a particular community. So the ability of that community to create a quality of place where they can retain their talent and they can recruit new talent is critical. And that's something that really has not been addressed by a statewide strategitic plan before, but will be a big focus on this, is the ability of communities to be great places to live. And a lot of communities already get that and are investing in their community. That is very important. So, first of all, you've got to be a place where people want to stay and they want to live. And then second of all, having the ability to train these people, having quality, from pre-K all the way through, through high school and 12, and then 2-year, and then our 4-year. So having that complete cycle is critical. And then AIDT, that is probably our #1 incentive.
I've heard it described as the secret sauce.
It is. I mean, Ed Castile and his team at AIDT, it has been such an honor to work with him and his team through many years.
Because they work directly with companies to get their workforce trained specifically to the task,
correct.
Right?
So they'll come in. Of course, there are long-term solutions that have to be in place because these companies hopefully will be here through generations. But to immediately get a company up and running, Ed and his team are the best in the country. They truly, truly are. And that's why I mentioned that I had dinner recently with the Secretary of Commerce from Arkansas. He had a team here to meet with Ed and his team to understand. So we truly are a showplace for the country on how to do this.
Yeah, doing something right if folks are wanting to copy you.
Absolutely.
I hate to say we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming in. I enjoyed this conversation. Lots of things to follow going forward, so I may be having you back.
Yes, absolutely. And back to the union question again, BCA and all of our partners have had a website up called Alabama Strong. And so that would be a great place to go to learn more about our our
so it's
union
alabamastrong.com?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, we'll share that with our viewers.
Great.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Cheaha Mountain, often called Mount Cheaha, is the highest natural point in Alabama at 2,407 feet above sea level. It is located in north-central Alabama in Cheaha State Park, surrounded by the Talladega National Forest in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This dramatic landscape gets its name from the Creek Indian name for the mountain. Chaha, meaning high place.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Danne Howard of the Alabama Hospital Association. Danne, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
I wanted to have you on because this week there was this joint meeting of the House and Senate Health Committees with guests from Arkansas and North Carolina talking about those states' experiences in recent Medicaid expansion or, akin to that. So I know you were a part of this meeting and in conversations about this. How did it go, and what was the messages that lawmakers heard from their colleagues and others from Arkansas and North Carolina?
Yes, it went very well in our opinion. It was very helpful for legislators in Alabama to hear from the lawmakers in both of those states who had some of the similar struggles and concerns moving into what they have now done to close their coverage gap through expansion resources. Arkansas, of course, was in 2014, so they've got a decade of experience to share. Okay. North Carolina just did theirs in December, so they don't have as much experience to share, but I think my biggest takeaway from North Carolina, even an early adopter or just recent adopter and recently closed their coverage gap, was one of the things that the senator from North Carolina said, that he lives in a very rural, conservative district. And no one in his district or in his state has said, you messed up, you shouldn't have done that. But instead, he's had hundreds of people reach out to him to thank him for making it available for their loved ones now to have access to health care. So I think that was...
political threat is maybe not as pronounced as some might think.
That's right, and I think it's important to hear that because I know there have been many years of debate. The Alabama Hospital Association has been supportive of finding a way to do this since it became available. So I know that there's been a lot of political gut-wrenching moments of legislators, not only on the philosophical side of it, but also on the financial side of it. So I think it was very helpful for them to hear. It wasn't easy, and they had to work through a lot of things, but they did it, and they're reaping the benefits of it now.
We'll talk about that coverage gap, because we hear that term a lot, and I know there are sometimes different figures of how many Alabamians are in that coverage gap, but kind of describe what that gap is and who falls into it.
Right. So the coverage gap are able-bodied, non-disabled individuals in Alabama who are between the age of 19 and 64. And if you're in the state of Alabama, if you are age 19 to 64, you're not eligible for Medicaid, regardless of your income. So if you make too much money, or not enough money to qualify for the subsidies that are available to help you purchase a plan on the marketplace that has been available because of the Affordable Care Act, then you don't have any resources. So you don't qualify for Medicaid regardless of what you make, and you don't make enough money to qualify for the subsidies. So the coverage gap are those, and if you are working, you might make too much money to be able to look for any type of premium assistance programs because they're also available only for the really low income. So the coverage gap are those that don't have anywhere else to turn to get insurance.
And I suppose not insurance through their employer, too.
Correct. There are many jobs that don't offer employer-sponsored insurance to everyone. For example, if you work part-time, you may have a part-time job, and many do, trying to go to school, finish college, or because you have other responsibilities, you might care for parents and have other things. So you have a part-time job that doesn't offer health care insurance. And not every company on full-time job offers employer insurance.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and Arkansas's example is interesting because they went this sort of public-private partnership route. And I know that you've been involved in this, sort of developing this all-health plan that would be similar to the Arkansas model. I know there's been talks going on with the governor's office. Take me into the room. What are y'all talking about in terms of, can you make this private-public partnership work, where I guess it would take Medicaid dollars to leverage it, but it wouldn't necessarily be a Medicaid card or something?
Correct. And very much like Arkansas with a few other components. You know, one of the biggest, I guess, tasks that in trying to look at what would work for Alabama, that was what our goal was. What is right for the state of Alabama? Because what other states did may not fit for the needs of our state. So we actually have worked really hard and long to pull together a plan that is specific for Alabama. No other state has adopted a similar plan that we think we can make happen here in Alabama, and that CMS, the oversight in Washington, would approve. And it very much mimics or follows the pattern of Arkansas in a public-private partnership for part of it, and traditional Medicaid for part of it, and then using employer-sponsored insurance premium assistance for another part of it. With that, there's about 250,000 to 300,000 Alabamians that we predict would be eligible for a program such as this. In doing it in the way that we've designed it, or that we are proposing that it be designed, only about 100,000 of those would actually go on traditional Medicaid, and those would be those at an income level of 100% of the poverty level below. So we are reducing the cost by putting in the public-private partnership so that we don't have 300,000 all of a sudden on the Alabama Medicaid rolls.
Okay. Well, that's okay. It seems to me that might be a little more palatable to a conservative Republican who has always had concerns about the word Medicaid expansion. Is that, I mean, are you getting feedback on that?
I think so, yes. I mean, you know, this is if you're working already, and if you're over 100% of the poverty level, you have some form of income coming in. So you're already working. More than half of the people that would be eligible in Alabama are working. But again, they don't have enough money, or they're not making enough money in their job to be able to afford their housing, everything else that they need to earn, and also to have health care insurance. Now, a lot of those, like I said earlier, have a subsidy that allows them to go into the marketplace and purchase insurance. But we see this as a keep working, you know, keep your job, stay in your job, and it's also the ability to have a stronger, healthier workforce. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention that because there's been so much talk of workforce in this session in terms of getting folks off the sidelines, back into the workforce. And it's all about removing barriers to the workforce. And I've brought this up multiple times to the Lieutenant Governor, to the Speaker, and others, saying there's not a health care component into this. And there's probably a good reason why. But people do list access to health care as a barrier for entering the workforce. Like if they get a job, do they lose some kind of benefits or you know, something like that? And just being healthy in general, being able to be, you know, go to the doctor and things like that. So is this a workforce issue, or should
Absolutely.
it be considered that?
It is. And as a matter of fact, the governor's workforce task force did a survey of individuals that are not currently in the workforce to find out what are the biggest barriers that you have. The top two, the first was transportation and the second was health. The second largest barrier for Alabamians currently not participating and not working is their health. So for example, we have individuals that may have uncontrolled diabetes. They don't have access to a primary care physician because they don't have insurance, and they don't have the ability to pay for the insulin, or they may not have the ability to pay for the type of groceries that would help them eat better to help control their diabetes. And so it's a vicious circle. And if you have uncontrolled diabetes, as just one example of a health condition, you may be sick a lot and not be able to be at work,
right.
And so you can't hold down a job. If we can find a way to encourage access to care, because now you have insurance and we can get those individuals healthy, then they can go get a job and hold a job. So it definitely is a workforce bill.
Well, all this sounds great. And I hear this from Republicans all the time that say, look, we'd love to do it, but things cost money. And there are some real concerns. I've heard it from the governor. I've heard it from people in this building saying, like, yeah, but the federal money will run out. We have serious concerns about can we actually afford this, because they don't want to bankrupt the state 10 years from now.
Right.
Talk about the costs, how that lines up with federal money and state money, and long term, whether the state can afford this.
Yeah, and there's a lot in that, so I'm going to high level,
Sure.
right? in the post-COVID, one of the bills that Congress passed, the American Rescue Plan Act, included an additional incentive for the states who have not yet closed their coverage gaps. And in that, you get an additional match rate from the federal government. So currently, before that, it was 90% federal dollars, 10% state dollars for the population that you would now provide coverage to. And let me stop there and add one thing. Those are not federal dollars that are just coming out of nowhere. Alabamians are already paying taxes to the federal government that support this program, but our tax monies go into other states who have closed their coverage gaps. In the ARPA bill that passed in Congress, an additional 5% match was added as an incentive for states like Alabama to be able to use those resources and financially help them be able to get off the ground for us additional 2 years. With that additional money, including the design of the plan that we talked about earlier with the different components in the public-private partnership, we'll actually have more money than we need for the state to implement the program for several years. If we bank the additional money that we will have and allow it to be invested very much like the Alabama Trust Fund does now, then our projections, and verified, and the projections run by Dr. Jaravi, who the state uses for their projections on all of their projects, show that we will probably have the ability to no additional state dollars needed to pay for this for maybe 15 years. Now, it's hard to predict anything 15 years out.
Sure.
Nobody knows what 15 years from now looks like. But what we do know is a waiver, this is a demonstration waiver with the federal government, those are only for 5 years. And during that time, and at the end of 5 years, they don't just automatically renew. We have to go back to the state has to go back to the federal government and renegotiate. If it looks like we're not doing as well as we thought we would financially, we have an opportunity to make adjustments. If something happens at the federal level that changes the 90-10 partnership of a match, we have the ability to withdraw. So there are a lot of different avenues to keep it in check, not knowing what 15 years down the road looks like. But in addition to all of that, the economic impact, when you have more people working, you have more income taxes going into the state budgets, you have more spending power of people able to go out and purchase things, and sales taxes. So our income and our budgets grow. Other states have seen that as well significantly, and that's what we commissioned Dr. Jaravi to do his projections on. So the economics of this, there's not one piece of our social or economic life in the state of Alabama this does not positively impact.
Interesting. Well, talk about rural hospitals, because I know ever since this conversation began about Medicaid expansion, it's been talked about that this could be a saving grace for rural hospitals. I know there's been a lot of closures. I don't remember the exact number right now, but what is the state of rural hospitals? I know there's a bill to try to give them some support financially somewhere in the process. Talk about rural hospitals and where we are.
Well, it's as fragile as ever. We get asked that question an awful lot. We're very fortunate that we've not had a hospital closure since right after the pandemic began. In Pickens County, that hospital closed. But we're really fragile with a lot of them that we really don't know how long, and there's not a list anywhere, but there are enough people, enough hospitals that are on that line that I do not see how we're going to not have additional closures sometime in the next several years if all things stay the same. Closing the coverage gap is one huge thing. It's the one thing the state of Alabama can do to add some security back into the rural hospitals in particular, but all of the hospitals. This is not a rural and urban issue alone. If the rural hospitals are not able to stay financially viable and continue to provide the services that they can, the urban hospitals in Montgomery, Birmingham, Huntsville, they can't absorb the volume of patients. So that is a compounding effect that then eventually starts eroding our entire healthcare delivery system. So the rural hospitals are hanging on by a thread. Through cuts of services, through layoffs, through other things that they're having to do. They're able to stay open right now, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that happens. When a rural hospital closes, it's not just the loss of health care, it's also the loss of jobs, The local businesses are not supported then. We support the local businesses in every rural community. So it's a huge blow to any rural community to lose a hospital.
Yeah, certainly an issue to watch going forward. And thank you so much for coming on the show to explain all this really in depth. That's why we like Capital Journal. It allows the time for these conversations. But Danne Howard of the Alabama Hospital Association, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
The DeSoto Caverns is best known for its great onyx cathedral, some 120 feet high and larger than a football field. The limestone cave, roughly 3 million years old, has a long and fascinating history. It is home to a 2,000-year-old Native American burial site, and the oldest graffiti in a U.S. cave was a source of saltpeter for gunpowder during the Civil War and operated as a speakeasy during Prohibition.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back on Monday at 10:30 with more coverage of the Alabama Legislature, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.